those of you who don't know me, my name is Shannon Lee Bear LaValle Cawthron, and I am the Gothi for the Sheltering Hall Kindred. And this video is really to refute certain statements that were made by the American Folk Assembly in regards to who may and may not worship in any of the heathen faiths. The statement was made that non-white, non-heterosexual, non-cisgendered people have no right to worship in the heathen community. I take issue with this on several fronts. First, from a historic basis, we have anecdotal evidence that gender roles were not as strictly enforced as Hollywood would have us believe. We have anecdotal evidence that entire groups of individuals, one of the most commonly referred to references is priests of Frere, would dress in long robes and adorn themselves with bells and sing and dance for the amusement and pleasure of their god, which you can, with a little bit of research, discover that when they say robes, they refer to primarily as dresses. This ties into an entire other topic of discussion that is really more appropriate for another video. Moving on directly from this, we also know that this is a tribal society, and remained a tribal society in many ways right up until and even after the Christianization of the Germanic peoples, all the way up to the modern era and in certain places. And, well, honestly, even today, in some portions of what we think of as the Germanic world, really, at that point, more indigenous peoples living around the Arctic Circle. But, I digress. One of the primary aspects of cultural norms in almost any given tribal society is what does and does not benefit the tribe. And when you are talking about marriages, this means political alliances, financial gain, and the production of children. Very, very rarely did you ever see marriages take place because of a quote-unquote love match. This was not a common practice really anywhere in the ancient world, but even in Scandinavia or the Germanic regions for a very long time, it was not uncommon for married couples individually to take lovers outside of the marriage that had to do with emotion and emotional satisfaction and not just fulfilling the legal obligations of a marriage contract. You take on top of this that along the coastal regions, a lot of times men would leave their families, and sometimes women would leave their families for months or years or even decades to travel. We know that out of Scandinavia there were traders that went all the way to, well, first explorers that went all the way to Iceland and Greenland, traders up and down the coastal waterways, up and down the sea coast of Europe to the British Isles, down to Africa, around Africa, out to the Middle East. There is evidence that trade was conducted along northern trade routes. Actually, the Burka archaeological dig tells us that there was trade with people all the way from China, whether that was direct or indirect. And there is potential evidence to indicate that the Finns were in northwestern China significantly earlier than we had previously thought. Again, topic for another video, but what this means is that you have a group of individuals who are separated from their families, separated from their wives, separated from their lovers for an extensive amount of time. And human nature being what it is, someone was going to take a lover. That's just a reality. It may have been another member of the crew, it may have been someone they came across, it may have been both. These would not necessarily have been long-term relationships that would have come back to land with them, but since crews often serve together for more than one voyage, it would almost be safe to say that some of these relationships were more prominent than the legally recognized and binding marriages that these traders and sailors and merchants and mercenaries and raiders had back in their homelands. So the idea that a person who is not cisgendered, who is not heterosexual, cannot worship in the heathen faith is absolutely absurd. To gloss over things that we have written down that have been compiled over centuries, to gloss over and ignore the evidence of observation and just pure common sense and logical deduction because you want to embrace an ideal that is not even remotely close to being based in reality, but purely on the Hollywood screen, is foolish and absolutely repugnant to me. Anybody, gay, straight, bisexual, transgender, pansexual, asexual, all of these things are perfectly acceptable in heathenry, in Satru. And to make a blatant statement that if you don't adhere to this fictional norm that you're not welcome in this community is blatantly false. And it violates one of the principles that is huge for us, which is that reputation is a thing that is the building block for so much of the way we conduct ourselves. And that it is almost equivalent to a physical attack to go out of your way to damage the reputation of another person in a way that is unjustified, unprovoked, and uncalled for. This is almost equivalent to, in my opinion, an attack against other practitioners who don't adhere to their beliefs. And that is incredibly just disrespectful and rude. I cannot recognize or appreciate or in any way, shape, or form endorse any portion of this statement, but we'll begin with that one. That you have to be heterosexual to be heathen. I deny this. I flat out deny this. Some of the members of my kindred are bisexual, and I'm sure at some point we will have transgender and gay and lesbian members of our kindred as well. The quality of the person should far outweigh the quote-unquote qualifications that these people are trying to levy. So please, just do me a favor, and if you're watching this and you've never had contact with the Satru, or you've never had contact with heathenry, be aware that there are people out there who are hateful and bigoted and will use any opportunity to justify this. And especially in heathenry, there are a lot of people who will use it as a way to mask bigoted agendas or justify bigoted agendas, and this is not indicative of the actual faith or the people who practice it. Today, I want to talk about ethnicity. This is kind of a touchy subject for a lot of people, and I think it's one that is important to address. First things first, what we have to look at is that ethnicity is viewed very much through a modern lens right now. And this is dangerous when dealing with a tribal structure. Alright, because at the end of the day, when you talk about Germanic heathenry especially, you're talking about a pre-Christian Germanic tribal culture. That is what a lot, if not all of our beliefs derive from. And one of the things to keep in mind is that the faiths of these people were not centralized, okay? What that means is that there is no universal playbook. So, anybody has a right to worship however they choose, whether or not I agree with it. What I dislike is people using our faith as a mask for racial supremacy ideals, or gender supremacy ideals, or orientation supremacy ideals. So I want to address that real quick, all right? The Germanic peoples were tribal in nature, but there are certain things that were kind of common amongst all of them, not the least of which is that they traveled extensively. There is some archaeological evidence to support the idea that the peoples in the region that we now call Scandinavia were vastly more mobile than we originally thought, and may actually have made it all the way to northwestern China, right along the desert border against Mongolia, before that was a desert, to give you an idea of timetable. All right. This has yet to be substantiated because of political issues, but that's neither here nor there. My point is that there is some evidence that suggests this might be possible. We know for a fact that what we now refer to as Scandinavian peoples, the Germanic peoples of Northern Europe, traveled all the way to Russia, the steppes, Siberia, down to Byzantium, and all the way to the New World, hundreds of years before the rest of Europe even began to engage in this, even minor exploration. We know that they were in Africa, the Middle East, all throughout Europe, and as far as India, and possibly as far as China. A thing that is common amongst any culture that is this far flung is that they intermarried and took the people into their families from these other cultures and brought them into their own. Sometimes this resulted in blending of religious ideals, sometimes this resulted in the blending of cultural ideals, but the point is that there was not discrimination based off of what we now perceive as ethnicity. All right? Anybody could be adopted into any tribe for the right reasons. All right? So while we do have from source material stories that indicate that, according to the beliefs of our ancestors, the Germanic peoples are directly descended from the gods, that does not mean that only Germanic peoples can worship those gods. It's far more important to look at quality of individual than appearance of individual. All right? There's a common saying amongst the heathen community that deeds, not words. All right? Or we are our deeds. We are defined by our behaviors and our ability to conduct ourselves in a way that is pleasing to the gods and our ancestors. I'm speaking as a Gothi for an ancestral kindred, and I'm not of pure Germanic descent. Most of my ancestry comes from the British Isles, and there's only a touch of it that comes from what at the time would have been a Dane-held portion of France. That my Irish ancestry is actually probably mixed very heavily with the Norse bloodlines that were prevalent in Ireland throughout the Viking period. By the idea that you have to be pure Germanic, I don't fit. But in my area, I speak for a kindred. I speak on behalf of my people, and I speak as a teacher, and that's a position that, according to some folks, I shouldn't have. I have had conversations with a Gothi who would be the last person you think of as being Germanic because he's very black. But he is of South African descent, and his family is predominantly Dutch. So saying that appearance dictates is foolish. Saying that you have to have a Germanic last name is foolish. All right? We are talking about a culture that embraced the idea of expansion in both a literal and spiritual fashion. So before you are willing to start making judgments based off of race, you really should look at what you're supposedly representing. This is not a racist faith. This is not a racist practice. Racist practices are imposed over the teachings of the faith by racist individuals. So again, like I said yesterday, please ask questions, study, look around, and talk to people. Remember, we are our deeds. We are not our words. All right. So look for the signs. Well, to show you exactly how open I am, at least, there's a Bible verse that I think applies to this situation, and it says that you shall know a tree by the fruit it bears. That to me smacks very much of heathenry, but I think it's been made famous by the Christians, and good for them because it's a good phrase. So please pay attention, be strong, be well, and don't make the same mistake that some folks are making in the heathen community, making snap judgments about all of us. All right? Have a good day, stay safe, and be well.